Hello again, Bobcats. Last video in your lecture on time, okay? We just discussed a little bit about days. We talked about midday, and we talked about AM and PM, okay? And how the early Mesopotamians and Egyptians had derived these ideas of two 12-hour shifts of both day and night, okay? But for this last part of the lecture, I want us to talk about what is a year. And once again, I know that you guys have a pretty general understanding of what a year is. Where do you get that understanding? Well, as I already mentioned in the first video, time is a result, or our conception of time is defined by the language that we speak and the culture that we live in. So just please keep this in mind, okay? Other cultures, like let's say the Aborigines of Australia, have much different conceptions of time and may have different units of measurement of time as well too, okay? And you'll see how some of this is very much definitely a part of our language and our culture, okay? I'll show you what I mean here in just a second. What is a year? Well, obviously that is one orbit around the sun. And just as we had mentioned that if we were on the planet Mars or the planet Venus, and if one of those planets had turned around on its axis one full rotation, we would consider that a day, a Martian day, a Jupiter day, right? As long as it's one full turn on the axis. Now, we measure years on other planets the same exact way. How long does it take for that planet to orbit the sun? Now, planets that are closer to the sun, like Mercury and Venus, their year might be a little bit shorter because if you think about it, they have less distance to travel around the sun. But you might have your outer planets like Neptune, where it takes a very, very long time for that planet to make one full rotation around the sun, one full orbit. So their year might be very, very long. Okay, but we're not talking about years on Neptune or Venus. We're talking about years on Earth, okay? 365 and 1/4 of a day. Now, one thing that I'd like you to see is how this concept changes throughout time. For instance, the Roman calendar, there's one of your missing vocab terms. The Roman calendar had actually broken the year into 304 days. And those 304 days were broken into 10 months, okay? 2 months shy of a full year that we know now. Why is that? Well, back then, for some reason, they completely ignored winter. They just figured, you know what? Those winter months, specifically January and February, they didn't really care that much. They'll say, we're just going to turn the clock off and we'll start back up again in March, okay? But this also gives us some very interesting names for the months that we use today, because there are Latin roots attached to those months, and those Latin roots mean a specific number. It can get quite confusing. For instance, September. Now, sept, S-E-P-T, is Latin for 7, okay? So on the Roman calendar, September was actually the 7th month. However, we know September to actually be the 9th month. Likewise, October. Oct is Latin for 8. So to the Romans, October was the 8th month in the year. But to us, it's actually the 10th year. That's because we actually count the winter months. Likewise, we have November. Novum is Latin for 9. And November would have been the 9th month instead of the 11th month like we know it today. Lastly, we would have December, which would translate as the 10th month because deca is the Latin root meaning 10. But we know December to actually be the 12th month, okay? So I point this out so you can see how these ideas of time and even what we name the months can change drastically throughout the years. What is the biggest influence on how we see years and time using years? Well, we know that the year right now is 2020. But if you think about it, that's kind of an arbitrary number. Why is it 2020? Well, there's a very specific reason for this. The biggest influence, at least in the United States, in Europe, and a lot of the world, the biggest influence on measuring past and current years is going to be the religion of Christianity. And it's specifically because Christianity spreads in a big way from both the Roman Empire and then later on from the Spanish, the Portuguese, the British, the Dutch, and the French. They're going to bring Christianity to other parts of the world, and the way that we read, the numbers that we use for years are actually even derived from this faith, okay? What I mean by this, and this is something we've been talking about since our prehistory lecture, is this concept known as AD. Now, AD, you might see this as CE in a lot of cases. A lot of scientists will say the current year is 2020 CE, and what they mean by that is Common Era. Why do they bother doing that? I believe some of these scientists are trying to talk about time without bringing faith or Christianity into the mix. But it's important that we do know that AD is a Latin term that means anno, which is year. Like think of anniversary, right? Or annual, okay? Anno Domini, okay? Think of like dominion or dominate, right? And Anno Domini is Latin for year of our Lord. Now we've got two missing vocabs right here. We've got Christianity and also year of our Lord. When we say 2020, what we mean is the 2020th year of our Lord since Jesus was born, okay? Now, obviously, other parts of the world, that's not their Lord, okay? So there is a lot of effort to kind of bring the faith, bring Christianity out of this equation, but there's so much already said about this, and we use this value system, and so many countries know that the year is 2020 right now, that we just kind of use it anyways, and that's why you might see CE, Common Era, instead of Anno Domini. I mention this because it's very important that we understand that year of our Lord, that might be the number that we use, but that is not the faith that all people follow, okay? Just make sure that we understand that, okay? Latin for year of our Lord. We also have the other term, BC, and that was actually this other Latin term, ante Christum natum, which just means before the birth of Christ. And that eventually evolves into BC in English, or before Christ. Now, this term here, instead of BC, you might see BCE, which just means before Common Era, okay? Before Common Era, okay? And we've talked a lot about this, how once we hit that zero, the numbers start going backwards, okay? Almost like negative numbers. It can be very confusing, but what they have is they have this marker, and everything past it is 0 and up, and everything before it is 0 and backwards into negative numbers, okay? And that's for the system of Anno Domini, okay? And Anno Domini means in the year of our Lord, okay? Just make sure that we understand that, okay? Christianity being the biggest influence on how we measure these years and why we even use these numbers. They're not the only number systems that we use for years, though. This is important that we understand this. There are also very important ones that are in use to this day. One good example would be what's known as Anno Huangdi. And Anno Huangdi is used on the Chinese calendar, where the new year is not in January, but it's generally in February, okay? And if we were to take the year 2020 Anno Domini and translate that into Anno Huangdi, the year would actually be 4,718, okay? Just keep in mind, these numbers are kind of arbitrary, but they do help us find things in the past and make plans for the future. Another great example of this would be on the Jewish calendar here. We have Anno Mundi, and this actually means in the year of our planet, the year of our world. And this year actually marks the beginning of everything, okay? And you can see that year is a little bit bigger here. If we were to take the year 2020 AD and translate it into Anno Mundi, we would actually be in the year 5,780. And just like with Anno Huangdi, the year changes at a different point. For the Jewish calendar, the year changes in September. Rosh Hashanah, I might be wrong on that, but there's a Jewish New Year as well too. But that occurs in September instead of January or February, like with the Chinese calendar, okay? So, the last thing I do want to make a mention of, okay, we've talked about dimensions. We talked about time being a dimension. It's a unit of measurement, right? It can tell us when a specific thing happened in the past, or we can use it to plan something in the future at a specific spot, right? Think of a birthday party, okay? You got your XYZ grid. That might be the street that you live on, okay, or your zip code. You can give a specific destination, but you have to say, be there at 1 o'clock for lunch, right? That is the measurement that tells us when something's going to happen. We also talked about birthdays and what a day is, one full spin on a planet's axis, okay? And we also talked about a year as well, too, and how this has changed throughout time. But what you need to make sure you understand is that all of these ideas about time, they are products of the language that we speak and the culture that we live in. How so? I just told you how a religion is the reason why we use this number system for years to this day. This is a cultural phenomenon, but it brings itself into the equation in a big way, okay? Once again, time is a product of our language and of our culture, and it can be different in different parts of the world, okay? All right, I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and we'll be talking with you soon, okay? Take care.